Bob Gibson. Bob Gibson. The Cardinals' ace was arguably the most intimidating pitcher in baseball history. Batters literally feared for their lives when they stepped into the box against him. His 1968 season was so dominant that MLB had no choice but to change the rules. Gibson posted a mind-boggling 1.12 ERA that year, the lowest in the live ball era. He threw 13 shutouts and 28 complete games. At one point, he went 47 consecutive innings without allowing a run. Batters were helpless against his overpowering fastball and devastating slider, all delivered from a frightening mound presence that made hitters uncomfortable before they even saw a pitch. After the 1968 season dubbed the Year of the Pitcher, MLB took drastic action. They lowered the pitching mound from 15 inches to 10 inches and reduced the strike zone. The rule changes were directly aimed at reducing Gibson's advantage and balancing the game back toward hitters. While Gibson remained effective after the changes, posting a 2.18 ERA the following season, the league-wide offensive numbers immediately increased, just as MLB had hoped. Candy Cummings. Then came Candy Cummings. Back in the 1860s, this Brooklyn-born pitcher changed baseball forever with one simple innovation: the curveball. As legend has it, Cummings was skipping clamshells across a beach when he noticed how they curved through the air. He wondered if he could make a baseball do the same thing. After years of experimentation, Cummings debuted his curveball in 1867, while pitching for the Brooklyn Excelsiors. Batters were completely baffled by this new pitch that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Many claimed it was an optical illusion or even cheating. The controversy was so intense that the National Association of Baseball Players actually gathered in 1869 to debate whether the curveball should be legal. Despite the uproar, the curveball was eventually permitted, though many rule clarifications followed to define legal pitching motions. While this isn't a case of a rule being created to stop Cummings, his innovation forced baseball to evaluate and codify pitching rules that had previously been vague or non-existent. Today, Cummings is enshrined in the Baseball Hall of Fame as the inventor of the curveball, a pitch that revolutionized the game. Eddie Gaedel. Then came Eddie Gaedel. On August 19, 1951, St. Louis Browns owner Bill Veeck orchestrated one of baseball's most memorable stunts by signing Gaedel, who stood just 3 foot 7 inches tall. Veeck saw a loophole in the rulebook. Nothing specified a minimum height for players. Wearing uniform number 1/8, Gaedel made his first and only plate appearance as a pinch hitter against the Detroit Tigers. With a strike zone measuring just 1.5 inches, Tigers pitcher Bob Kane couldn't find the zone. Gaedel walked on 4 straight pitches, was replaced by a pinch runner, and entered baseball lore forever. American League President Will Harridge was furious. He voided Gaedel's contract the next day, claiming it made a mockery of the game. MLB quickly instituted a new rule requiring all player contracts to be approved by the commissioner before they could appear in games. This effectively prevented teams from signing players solely for publicity stunts or exploitive purposes. While Gaedel's MLB career lasted just 1 plate appearance, his impact on baseball's rulebook remains permanent. The Eddie Gaedel rule ensures that teams can exploit similar loopholes for competitive advantage or publicity. Carl Mays. Carl Mays was a submarine-style pitcher known for his aggressive approach. On August 16, 1920, while pitching for the New York Yankees, Mays threw a fastball and struck Cleveland Indians shortstop Ray Chapman in the head. In an era before batting helmets, the ball hit Chapman's skull with such force that Mays thought it had hit Chapman's bat. The sound was so similar that Mays fielded the rebounding ball and threw to first base. Chapman collapsed at home plate, blood pouring from his ear. He died 12 hours later, the only MLB player to die from an injury sustained during a game. The tragedy sent shockwaves through baseball, especially because Mays had a reputation for intimidating hitters with inside pitches. As a direct response to Chapman's death, MLB introduced 2 significant rule changes. First, umpires were introduced to replace dirty or scuffed balls regularly, making them easier for batters to see. Second, pitchers were banned from using the spitball and other defaced ball pitches, though a grandfather clause allowed 17 existing spitball pitchers to continue using the pitch until retirement. These changes fundamentally altered baseball, leading to the end of the dead ball era and ushering in a more offense-oriented game. While Mays continued his career, he remained a controversial figure, with some teammates and opponents refusing to play with or against him. Ty Cobb. Ty Cobb was baseball's first superstar, and perhaps its most feared competitor. The Georgia Peach played with an intensity and aggression that often crossed the line into dangerous territory, particularly when it came to his base running. Cobb's signature move was sliding into bases with his spikes high, deliberately aiming to injure fielders who dared to block his path. In one infamous incident in 1909, Cobb sliced open Philadelphia Athletics third baseman Frank Baker's arm with his metal spikes, leaving an 8-inch gash. This wasn't an isolated incident. Cobb's vicious slides injured numerous opponents throughout his career. The American League responded by implementing a rule specifically targeting Cobb's tactics. New language was added to the rulebook stating that runners who deliberately spiked a fielder would be called out and subjected to ejection. Umpires were instructed to pay special attention to Cobb and others who had developed reputations for dangerous slides. Despite the rule changes, Cobb continued his aggressive style of play, though perhaps with slightly more restraint. He finished his career with a .366 batting average, still the highest in MLB history, and revolutionized base running with his aggressive approach. The rules implemented to curb his dangerous tactics remain in effect today, evolving into a modern sliding regulation that aimed to protect fielders from injury. Ray Chapman. Ray Chapman wasn't just the victim of the Carl Mays incident. He was actually responsible for a rule change himself, albeit posthumously. Chapman was one of baseball's first great bunters, having mastered the art of the drag bunt. His technique was so effective that it forced a significant rule modification. Before Chapman's innovation, a bunt that rolled foul after being fair was simply a foul ball, no matter how many times this occurred. Chapman exploited this rule by repeatedly bunting balls that would start fair and then roll foul, effectively wearing down pitchers and extending at-bats indefinitely. After numerous complaints from opposing teams, MLB changed the rules to state that a bunt that rolls foul with 2 strikes is an automatic strikeout. This Chapman rule remains in effect today and is a fundamental part of baseball strategy. Tragically, Chapman's contributions to baseball's rulebook are overshadowed by his untimely death. Had he lived, many baseball historians believe he would have been a Hall of Fame shortstop. Instead, his legacy lives on through the rule changes he inspired both during his life and as a result of his tragic death. Rube Waddell. Rube Waddell was one of baseball's first great strikeout artists, but he's remembered as much for his eccentric behavior as for his pitching prowess. The left-handed pitcher for the Philadelphia Athletics had a childlike personality that often led to unusual situations on and off the field. One of Waddell's strangest quirks was his fascination with fire engines. He was known to abandon his team mid-game to chase fire trucks down the street. This became such a problem that his contracts eventually included a specific clause forbidding him from leaving games to follow fire engines. More significantly for baseball's rulebook, Waddell's unusual behavior on the mound led to a rule change. He had a habit of distracting opposing batters by waving his fielders off the field, claiming he would strike out the side without their help. After numerous complaints, MLB implemented rules requiring all defensive players to remain on the field during play. Another Waddell-inspired rule came from his tendency to throw at the heads of opposing batters who fouled off his pitches. This led to stricter enforcement of existing rules against intentionally throwing at batters and eventually contributed to the development of modern pitcher ejection policies. Despite his eccentricities, Waddell was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1946, a testament to his dominance on the mound. His 349 strikeouts in 1904 remained the American League record until Nolan Ryan broke it 69 years later. King Kelly. King Kelly was baseball's first superstar in the 1880s, famous for his innovative play and willingness to bend rules. His most notorious tactic involved cutting across the infield when running bases when umpires weren't looking, essentially skipping bases entirely. In one legendary incident, Kelly was on first base when a fly ball was hit to the outfield. As the ball was in the air, Kelly shouted, "Kelly now catching," and claimed to have tagged the runner out after catching the ball. Umpires were powerless against his deception since substitutions weren't formally recorded. These antics led to 2 significant rule changes. First, MLB mandated that all substitutions must be reported to and approved by the umpire before taking effect. Second, base runners were required to touch each base in order with umpires specifically positioned to monitor compliance. Kelly's innovative, if somewhat unethical, approach to the game earned him induction into the Hall of Fame in 1945. The rules he inspired remain fundamental aspects of baseball today, ensuring fair play and preventing the kind of creative cheating that was Kelly's specialty. Whitey Herzog and the St. Louis Cardinals. Whitey Herzog's Whitney Ball Cardinals of the 1980s revolutionized baseball with their aggressive base-stealing and artificial turf-friendly style of play. Herzog specifically built his team to take advantage of Busch Stadium's artificial turf and spacious dimensions, creating a significant home field advantage. The Cardinals became so dominant at home that MLB eventually addressed their artificial advantage. After the 1986 season, MLB standardized baseline dimensions and implemented stricter regulations on artificial playing surfaces to prevent teams from customizing their home fields to such extremes. Herzog's Cardinals weren't stopped by these changes, winning the National League pennant in 1987 despite the new regulations. Whitney ball remained effective because it was based on sound baseball principles: speed, defense, and situational hitting, rather than merely exploiting the home field. Herzog's influence extended beyond rule changes. His strategic innovations changed how teams thought about constructing rosters and developing offensive strategies, particularly in the era before analytics revolutionized the game. His induction into the Hall of Fame in 2010 cemented his legacy as one of baseball's great innovators. Don Drysdale. Don Drysdale, the Dodgers' intimidating right-hander, was notorious for his willingness to throw at batters. His philosophy was simple. If one of his teammates got hit, he would hit two opponents in retaliation. The approach made him one of the most feared pitchers of his era. In 1968, the same year of the pitcher that saw Bob Gibson's dominance, Drysdale set a record with 58 2/3 consecutive scoreless innings. This streak included a controversial moment when he hit San Francisco's Dick Dietz with the bases loaded. Under normal circumstances, this would have forced in a run and ended the streak. However, umpire Harry Wendelstedt ruled that Dietz had not attempted to avoid the pitch, and therefore awarded him first base but did not award the Giants a run. This incident, along with Drysdale's general approach to intimidation, contributed to MLB clarifying the hit-by-pitcher rules after the 1968 season. The rules were modified to explicitly state that a batter being hit by a pitch automatically awards first base and forces in a run with the bases loaded, regardless of whether the batter attempted to avoid the pitch. Drysdale's intimidation tactics also influenced the development of warnings and ejections for pitchers who deliberately throw at batters. Today's system of warnings to both benches after a hit batsman can be traced back to efforts to curtail the type of retaliatory pitching that Drysdale made famous. Roger Maris. Roger Maris didn't break any rules, but his historic 1961 season, in which he hit 61 home runs to break Babe Ruth's record, led to one of baseball's most controversial rule distinctions. Commissioner Ford Frick, a friend of Ruth's, declared that Maris's record would carry an asterisk in the record books because the 1961 season was 8 games longer than Ruth's 1927 season. While no actual asterisk ever appeared in the official record books, Frick's declaration created a separate category for records set in 154-game seasons versus 162-game seasons. This distinction stood until 1991, when Commissioner Fay Vincent officially removed the separate categories, recognizing Maris as the single-season home run record holder without qualification. The Maris asterisk controversy led to MLB to establish clear protocols for how records should be recognized when structural changes to the game occur. Today, MLB's approach to record keeping explicitly accounts for changes in season length, rule modifications, and other factors that might affect statistical achievements. Maris's experience also highlighted the importance of fair treatment of players in historical contexts, influencing how later record-breaking achievements would be recognized and celebrated. Charlie Finley. Charlie Finley, the controversial owner of the Oakland Athletics during their dynasty years in the early 1970s, was constantly pushing for rule changes and innovations. His most successful campaign was the introduction of the designated hitter to the American League in 1973, a change that fundamentally altered baseball. Finley also successfully advocated for nighttime World Series games, which drastically increased television viewership. His push for colorful uniforms transformed baseball athletics, moving the game away from traditional white and gray uniforms to the vibrant designs teams use today. Not all of Finley's ideas were implemented. He campaigned for orange baseballs to improve visibility, mechanical rabbits to deliver balls to umpires, and bases that would release fireworks when touched during home run trots. While these concepts were rejected, they demonstrated Finley's understanding that baseball needed to evolve to maintain fan interest. Ironically, some of Finley's rejected ideas have found new life in modern baseball. The minor leagues have experimented with colorful baseballs, and MLB has implemented pace of play rules that Finley advocated for decades earlier. While his methods were often abrasive, Finley's forward-thinking approach to baseball's rules and presentation helped modernize the game. George Brett. George Brett's pine tar incident on July 24, 1983, led to one of baseball's most famous rule clarifications. Brett hit a go-ahead home run against the Yankees in the 9th inning, but New York manager Billy Martin immediately asked the umpires to check Brett's bat. Umpire Tim McClellan measured the pine tar on Brett's bat against the 18-inch limit stated in the rulebook, found it excessive, and called Brett out, negating the home run. Brett's famous eruption from the dugout became an iconic baseball moment, but the controversy was just beginning. The Royals protested the game, and American League President Lee MacPhail ultimately overturned the decision. MacPhail ruled that while Brett had technically violated the rule, the spirit of the pine tar rule was to prevent balls from being discolored, not to disallow home runs. As a result, MLB clarified the pine tar rule to state that a player would be asked to change his bat if excessive pine tar was discovered during play, but any plays completed with the bat would stand. The game was resumed from the point after Brett's home run, and the Royals won 5-4. The pine tar game forced baseball to examine the purpose behind its rules rather than just their technical application, setting an important precedent for future rule interpretations. Brett's legacy now includes not just his Hall of Fame career, but also this significant contribution to baseball's approach to rules enforcement. Albert Belle. Albert Belle was one of baseball's most feared sluggers in the 1990s, but he was also notorious for using corked bats. The most famous incident came on July 15, 1994, when Chicago White Sox manager Gene Lamont suspected Belle was using a corked bat and asked umpires to confiscate it for examination. What followed was an elaborate scheme to retrieve the illegal bat. Indians relief pitcher Jason Grimsley crawled through the ceiling tiles of the umpires' dressing room and switched Belle's corked bat with a legal one belonging to teammate Paul Sorrento. The problem? The bats had players' names burned into them, and the umpires immediately noticed the switch. MLB handled Belle a 10-game suspension, reduced to 7 on appeal, and implemented stricter protocols for securing confiscated equipment. New rules required that suspicious bats be placed in tamper-evident containers and secured in locations accessible to only authorized personnel. Belle's incident also led to more comprehensive inspection procedures. Umpires received additional training on how to identify potentially modified equipment, and MLB increased penalties for equipment tampering. While Belle continued his slugging ways, the Belle rules made it much more difficult for players to doctor their equipment without detection. Peter Rose. Pete Rose, baseball's all-time hit leader, changed the rules of the game through his aggressive play, particularly his infamous collision with catcher Ray Fosse in the 1970s All-Star Game. Rose's full-speed crash into Fosse to score the winning run left the young catcher with a fractured and separated shoulder that never properly healed. While collisions at home plate had always been a part of baseball, Rose's unnecessarily violent hit in an exhibition game sparked debate about player safety. It took decades, but MLB finally addressed the issue after San Francisco catcher Buster Posey suffered a season-ending injury in a 2011 collision. In 2014, MLB implemented Rule 7.13, commonly known as Buster Posey Rule, but which might just as accurately be called the Pete Rose Rule. This regulation prohibits runners from deviating from their direct pathway to the plate in order to initiate contact with the catcher. Catchers, meanwhile, cannot block the plate without possession of the ball. Rose's collision with Fosse represents a watershed moment in baseball's evolution toward player safety. While it took over 40 years for MLB to formally address the issue, the seeds of the change were planted that night in 1970 when Rose's win-at-all-cost mentality permanently altered Ray Fosse's career. Tony La Russa. Tony La Russa revolutionized bullpen management during his managerial career, particularly with the Oakland Athletics and St. Louis Cardinals. His innovative use of specialist relievers, including the development of the modern closer role with Dennis Eckersley, changed how baseball games were managed in the late innings. La Russa's strategy of making frequent pitching changes to create favorable matchups was so effective that it significantly lengthened games. By the early 2010s, the La Russa effect had become a concern for MLB as they sought ways to improve pace of play. In response, MLB implemented several rules specifically targeting La Russa's tactics. In 2020, they introduced the 3-batter minimum rule, requiring relievers to face at least 3 batters unless they finish an inning. This directly countered La Russa's strategy of using pitchers for single-batter matchups. Earlier pace of play rules, including limits on mound visits and timers between pitching changes, were also responses to the game management style La Russa pioneered. Ironically, La Russa returned to managing the White Sox in 2021, forced to operate under rules specifically designed to prevent the strategies that had made him successful. La Russa's impact on baseball's rulebook demonstrates how innovation by a single individual can force the sport to evolve its regulations. While some fans lament the loss of strategic elements, the rules inspired by La Russa have unquestionably made games move more quickly. Chase Utley. Chase Utley's aggressive slide into second base during the 2015 NLDS broke Mets shortstop Ruben Tejeda's leg and sparked immediate controversy. Utley began his slide well after passing the base and made direct contact with Tejeda rather than the base itself, a technique that had been part of baseball for generations but had become increasingly dangerous as players grew bigger and faster. The Utley slide forced MLB to reconsider takeout slides at second base. Before the 2016 season, MLB implemented Rule 6.01, commonly known as the Utley Rule, which requires runners to make a bona fide slide, defined as one where they can attempt to reach and stay on the base, slide before reaching the base, and don't change their pathway to initiate contact. The rule change has significantly reduced injuries at second base, though it remains controversial among traditionalists who view hard slides as part of baseball's competitive nature. Utley himself adjusted to the new rules during his final seasons, demonstrating that players could remain effective without dangerous takeout slides. The Utley rule represents part of baseball's ongoing evolution toward player safety, similar to the rules against home plate collisions and high spikes. While Utley certainly wasn't the first player to execute a hard takeout slide, his high-profile play in a playoff game became the catalyst for change that many believe was long overdue. Baseball's rulebook is a living document that has evolved over 150 years, often in direct response to the actions of individual players. From Candy Cummings' curveball to Chase Utley's slide, innovative and sometimes controversial players have forced the sport to reconsider its regulations. This pattern will undoubtedly continue as future generations push boundaries and exploit loopholes, ensuring that baseball remains a dynamic game constantly adapting to its most influential participants. If you enjoyed this exploration of how players have changed baseball's rules, be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the rich history of America's pastime. Baseball's ever-evolving rulebook tells the story not just of a sport, but of the remarkable individuals who have shaped it through their talent, innovation, and occasionally their willingness to test the boundaries of what's permitted on the diamond.